Hi guys, long time no talk. As you may or may not have noticed, a lot has happened in UAP world recently. We had Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick stepping down as director of AARO. Congress passing an amendment to get Dave Grush into a SCIF. There was the first annual Soul Foundation Symposium, Dave Grush appearing on JRE, and the Schumer Amendment. Oh, and that Daily Mail article about the CIA office that's been retrieving UAPs since its inception in 2003. Yeah, quite a bit has happened. With all of that going on, you might have missed that George Knapp and AAWSAP Program Managers, Drs. Jim Lacatski and Colm Kelleher, released a second book about AAWSAP called Inside the U.S. Government Covert UFO Program Initial Revelations. Their first book, Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, focused primarily on the creation of AAWSAP and what it was designed to do, and looked at some of the cases that AAWSAP investigated. But, and they received a lot of criticism for this, they talked about a lot of the more paranormal or woo aspects of their investigations. Even though that is totally a part of all of this, they still got a lot of for it. This book focuses primarily on the physics and engineering aspects of UAP performance, which, I'll be the first to admit, pretty much went right over my head. I know I may look like a rocket scientist, but theoretical and applied physics and engineering are not at all in my wheelhouse. But for those of you who are particularly interested in those 38 DIRDs from Project Physics, this book is definitely for you. Even though I won't be going into that stuff in this video, there are still a few things that I do want to talk about, such as a bombshell from Dr. Lacatski, as well as some additional details about the Tic Tac UFO incident and a terrifying decades-long assault on the people of Kelleher, Brazil, and some interesting conclusions that Dr. Lacatski and Dr. Kelleher have come to as far as what they think UAPs are. So let's just get into it. The very first thing that stood out to me was actually in the preface. Now, this might not be news to many of you, but it was to me. As of August 20th, 2023, two separate events had emerged that appeared to have slowed the momentum of additional UAP hearings in the House of Representatives. James Comer, the chairman of the House Oversight Committee, stated that any more hearings from the House Oversight Committee would cause serious harm to the reputation of the Department of Defense in the eyes of the public and should be avoided for the foreseeable future. As a result of this decision, there will be no more hearings on this topic by the House Oversight Committee. Secondly, Rep. Mike Turner from Ohio, who is the chairman of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, and whose congressional district houses Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and whose biggest donors include Raytheon, Boeing, and Lockheed Martin, has conversed with and convinced HOC Chairman James Comer to stop any further HOC hearings forthwith.
You can't keep getting away with it!
Chapters 1 through 4 are basically just about AAWSAP and aren't anything new if you've read Skinwalkers at the Pentagon or watched my video, link in description. Chapters 5 through 8 are on UAP lift, propulsion, spatial temporal or space-time translation, and power generation. At the end of each chapter, they also include a list of the relevant DIRDs, which you can go read for yourself. I'll post a link in the description to where you can find those. Good luck! Chapter 9 is where we find a very casually dropped bombshell by Dr. Lacatski. Quote, at the conclusion of a 2011 meeting in the Capitol building with a U.S. Senator and an agency undersecretary, Lacatski, the only one of this book's authors present, posed a question. He stated that the United States was in possession of a craft of unknown origin and had successfully gained access to its interior. That's right, just so casually dropped in there from one of AAWSAP's program managers that the U.S. is in possession of a UAP and have gained access to its interior. Here's a clip of Dr. Lacatski on Weaponized addressing this bombshell and also not refuting Jeremy Corbell's statement that we've been reverse engineering it.
You told us, because you were allowed to tell us, that our government has a UFO in its possession and has been able to access the inside of it, right?
Yes.
You just made the admission that our government is reverse engineering. If we got inside of it, we're reverse engineering UFOs.
You see, I'm not speaking at all. I mean, I'm not going beyond what you read from the book.
I mean, of course, none of us are really surprised, right? But it is the first official confirmation that it's true. Dr. Lacatski said something else in this interview that I found really interesting, and hopefully I can find the clip. He basically said something to the effect of, there are so many different types of UAPs that
it would be the equivalent of us going out for a drive in our car. And every car and truck we meet on the road is of a different design. I mean, to me, that's an interesting insight.
I thought that was an interesting little tidbit. But getting back to chapter 9, a bit further into it, they reference one of Bud Hopkins's cases involving the alleged abduction of 2 girls. I can't say whether or not this alleged abduction occurred, but what I found striking was that it was included in the book at all. Dr. Lacatski and Dr. Kelleher signed off on it. I don't know if this is the kind of thing Dr. Lacatski meant by read between the lines.
Read between the lines. That applies both to skinwalkers at the Pentagon and Initial Revelations.
But I take that to mean that they're acknowledging that abductions are real. Let me know in the comments what you think. And on that point, I want to include this clip from Weaponized.
Jacques Vallée got up and said, your language doesn't include visitors to people's bedrooms. And Nell was like, we realize that, but we just can't put that in there right now. And we all realize they're doing it in steps. You just can't say, by the way, we have craft, and by the way, they're abducting us.
Okay, now we're going to skip ahead to chapter 11, which is the original, minimally edited Tic Tac Report as received from Naval Intelligence by AAWSAP. Most of it I already covered in my previous video, link in description, but there are a few details that were new to me and that raise a lot of questions. For starters, Lieutenant Colonel Douglas Kurth, who was the first pilot to make it to the coordinates where the Tic Tac was, reported that, quote, the controller asked if he had ordnance on board, which was odd since no controller had ever asked that question during a situation of identifying an unknown contact over the U.S. or international territory, end quote. Interesting. Wonder why they asked that.
That's suspicious. That's weird.
It goes on to say that Commander Fravor was asked the same question, which, again, why? And would they have been asked to fire upon it if they did have live ordnance? The other interesting thing from Kurth's report is that he saw the disturbance in the water, but not the Tic Tac. Here's why that particular bit is interesting. The report includes observations from the USS Louisville, which was a submarine that was part of this training exercise and there for the Tic Tac event. They said that they never detected the Tic Tac on any of their sensors before, during, or after the event. Quote, based on the lack of detection of any unidentified sonar contacts, it is highly unlikely that an AAV operated below the surface of the ocean. It is possible that the AAV demonstrated the ability to be cloaked or be invisible to the human eye based on pilot reporting of the water disturbance with no visible craft, end quote. Kurth, he saw the disturbance in the water, but not the Tic Tac. Now, who knows, maybe the Tic Tac was visible and he just didn't see it. Or perhaps it was cloaked, which raises other questions. Like, why did it uncloak and engage with Commander Fravor and Lieutenant Dietrich in the way that it did? And even go so far as to appear at their cap point.
As we pulled nose onto the object, within about a half mile of it, it rapidly accelerated in front of us and disappeared. Our wingmen, roughly 8,000 feet above us, lost contact. So as we started to turn back towards the east, the controller came up and said, sir, you're not going to believe this, but that thing is at your cap point, roughly 60 miles away in less than a minute. You can calculate the speed.
Like, clearly communicating that it was aware of them and what they were doing. Why? Another sort of standout quote from the book is in Chapter 16, under the subsection, Possible Nature of UAP Technology, which says, quote, everything works as if UAP were the product of a technology that integrates physical and psychic phenomena and primarily affects cultural variables in our society through the manipulation of physiological and psychological parameters in the witnesses, end quote. So they're saying that the phenomenon is the product of technology, and that technology triggers psychic effects, either intentionally or as a side effect. By psychic, they mean physical reality interacting with human consciousness. And they go on to say, quote, these consciousness phenomena are now too common to be ignored or relegated to the category of exaggerated or ill-observed facts. All of us who have investigated close-range sightings have become familiar with these effects, end quote. And finally, the purpose of this technology may be cultural manipulation.
What the fuck is going on in here on this day?
Thankfully, Jeremy brought this quote up to Dr. Lacatski and Dr. Kelleher, and they expanded on what they meant by that.
That statement comes, at least from my personal experience with spending hundreds of days on Skinwalker Ranch. There was a lot of evidence that was gathered, and some that I saw personally, involving the manipulation of perception. You've got to balance the idea that a technology can manipulate human perception, and even from a long-term perspective, manipulate human cultural phenomena, as well as, operate as a machine.
What do you mean manipulate cultural variables? I'm sorry, I'm obsessed with this quote.
Well, I got something to really reference, and it'll be another little bombshell of mine. What is the purpose of the Men in Black?
That is a question.
We have encountered the Men in Black, the legitimate ones. Legitimate ones.
You have.
I didn't say me, but the answer is yes. But what is the purpose of the Men in Black? It's always been the Men in Black dissuade. Do they? Knowing human psychology, do they, or do they do exactly the opposite? They draw attention to the phenomenon. And that's what I mean in my answer to you. I wanted to use an example of manipulating cultural variables.
No.
It isn't just Dr. Lacatski and Dr. Kelleher, by the way, who believe that cultural manipulation may be a core component of this phenomenon.
There's a lot of really good work and really good documentation regarding the manipulation of perception by people like Jacques Vallée. Even Whitley Strieber has written in his latest book.
What I take them to be saying, and I could be wrong, is that UAPs may actually be the product of some other technology that integrates with or affects human consciousness for the purposes of cultural manipulation, possibly to drive or dissuade interest in it. And the phenomenon is so bizarre that we can't seem to nail down anything concrete about it. Is that deliberate on their part? Whoever or whatever they are? This chapter was rather bone-chilling, and it challenges many of the assumptions and hopes that I have about UAPs and NHI. I think a lot of us hope, myself included, that UAPs and the possible NHI associated with them are at best friendly guardians of Earth and its inhabitants, and at worst, neutral observers. But Chapter 19 paints an entirely different, very disturbing picture. Quote, since the 1970s, and probably much earlier, unidentified flying objects have been inflicting injuries, some of which proved fatal, to people in Brazil, perhaps more so than in all other countries combined, end quote. This decades-long assault is documented through more than 370 extensive on-site investigations by the likes of Dr. Jacques Vallée and numerous other government and investigative bodies, including AAWSAP. It sounds like AAWSAP's investigation will be discussed more in a future book, but for now, bear with me as I read to you this excerpt that gives you an idea of what the victims were dealing with. Quote, in many of the more extreme cases, people are burned, wounded, and left unconscious, with after effects ranging from headaches, nausea, and scarring to long-term illnesses and death. Many must deal with various kinds of physical evidence, extremes of reality transformations, and exposure to strange entities. In all cases where human effects were noted, some type of craft was reported. Sometimes the craft is seen coming from great distances, traveling at high speeds, and suddenly stopping in close proximity to the victims. At other times, and without any warning, a blinding light suddenly turns on above the heads of the victims. They are subjected to variations in hot and cold temperatures. Some are wounded, burned, and/or left unconscious at the scene. The terrified victims almost always try to flee to a safe location, but many are pursued by the blinding light and have trouble hiding. Sometimes they flee to the interior of a nearby building, but the light continues searching for them, shining through a tiled or thatched roof as if it were transparent. When pursued out in the open, victims have described how the craft tries to lift them from the ground, perhaps in an attempt to abduct them. And in some cases, the abduction attempt appears to have been successful. End quote. So just the stuff of nightmares, right? Also, more acknowledgement that abductions are real. Just saying. And if you're thinking that these crafts are large, structured vehicles, if you will, think again. The vast majority were either lights or baseball to basketball-sized orbs. Some of the incidents did involve close encounters with large structured craft where the inhabitants were visible, and many of them were the size of human adults with human features.
What the fuck is that? What the fuck is that?
I don't know what I'm more disturbed by. The 3 to 4 foot tall beings with large heads and frail bodies, or the ones that look like adult human beings. I remember that in Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, they mention a meeting or a dinner with some of the higher-ups read into AAWSAP that included someone high up in the Brazilian military. But it never went into why this Brazilian military official was there or what they discussed. I wonder if it was because of the events in Colares, or Varginha, or both. Just one of the many questions I have. Also, why were so many people being harmed? And why just in this particular area? And why for so long? James Ian Doley of Engaging the Phenomenon recently did an interview with George and Dr. Kelleher, and he brought the Colares incident up, along with some information that may shed some light on those events.
Is that in Jacques Vallée, Forbidden Science Volume 4, he talks about a document that he recovered. He said he secured a document talking about the CIA staging UFO events in Brazil and Argentina. And this is about the same time period. So twofold. Could any of that been at play? Number one. Number two, have Colm, you or George have seen that document that Jacques Vallée is referring to?
I have not seen that document.
Me neither.
Okay.
Colm, do you think it's an explanation for Colares?
You know, I have no idea without seeing the document and what it actually says. It's very difficult to evaluate. I haven't seen the document.
I find it interesting that Dr. Kelleher, who knows full well the intricate details of AAWSAP's investigation into Colares, isn't able to outright say, no, we investigated it and determined that it wasn't us. I hate to even speculate on such a thing, but what other choice do we have? Dr. Lacatski made a point of saying numerous times on Weaponized that we need to read between the lines. Unfortunately, we just don't have enough information to come to the right conclusions. Initial Revelations left me with so many more questions than answers, but that seems to kind of be the purpose behind it, at least partially. I think Dr. Lacatski sums it up pretty well in this clip.
Skinwalkers at the Pentagon and Initial Revelations, if I might use the shorter title on this new book, has not what I would call zingers in it, but has some interesting doors that have not been even mentioned. One, why was this program started? Two, why was this program ended? And we've raised this partially in Skinwalkers at the Pentagon. Did it end? You know, there's a lot of material in there that, as Kit Green, Dr. Kit Green, one of our consultants on the AAWSAP program, said, read between the lines. That applies both to Skinwalkers at the Pentagon and Initial Revelations. Read between the lines. Now, you may come to the wrong conclusions, and I can tell you on the topics I just read, you don't have enough information to come to the correct answers.
I want straightforward answers just as much as the next guy. And it is frustrating that we never get them. There's so much more that people like Dr. Lacatski and Dr. Kelleher know, and I'm sure they would love to share with us, as long as it doesn't compromise national security. But you know, when it really comes down to it, and these are just my thoughts here, I don't believe they have the concrete answers we're all looking for. I don't think anyone does, or will. A lot of people were pissed at Dr. Lacatski after his interview on Weaponized, saying that he seemed to enjoy knowing things that he couldn't tell us and just doesn't really tell us anything. But at the same time, Dr. Lacatski and Dr. Kelleher never had to tell us anything. I mean, if it weren't for them, we probably wouldn't even know about AAWSAP. I appreciate the efforts of Dr. Lacatski and Dr. Kelleher and Lou Elizondo and Christopher Mellon and Dave Grush and all of these people who are in the know and trying to get this information out to us, even when it's just raising questions and pointing out doors we were unaware of. You know, I think one of the problems that some people are running into, and this is just my opinion, is that they want there to be some kind of concrete evidence that convinces them or erases any sort of doubt that they have in their minds about UAPs and NHI, which is fair. But it seems like they don't really consider what the bar is for that evidence. Like, what would actually convince you of this being real? And the other part is that it seems like there are some people who want to be convinced of the reality of this without having to think about it. Because if you just take a moment to read the Schumer Amendment, for instance, you think all those references to non-human intelligence is accidental?
I brought the people who worked on that stuff to the Hill. I mean, this is why the members were so confident to put out the Schumer Amendment and stuff. And I was like, please explain. And they went into all those details and stuff. And I remember, some of the professional staff members were like, whoa, like they were like in G-lock, right? Because I mean, it like a total world bubble got burst right there for a lot of people.
I don't know. Even though it doesn't feel like we know anything and it's frustrating, we can't deny that these people's contributions have significantly moved the conversation forward and got us past the choke point of the last 80 years of, are UFOs real or not? They're real. So now what? Please let me know any and all of your thoughts down in the comments. If you liked this video, please consider liking it. It helps me out a lot. Thank you for watching, and I'll be seeing you all again soon.
What the fuck is going on in here on this day?